Hello and welcome, my name is Will, and in this video I thought I'd show you one of my first attempts into terrain making. I went into this without a plan or measurements and no experience of materials or techniques I should use or avoid, just a rough idea that I'd like to make some kind of wooden structure. As I started, I decided, given the size of the piece I'd made and the scale I was used to, it was going to be some kind of creepy cabin in the woods type build, but it turned out a little more like a creaking old shed than anything else. I hope you enjoy my process. I started by gathering a selection of wood and bits of corrugated card, as well as a hot glue gun and some PVA glue to stick the things together. I didn't really have a plan for what I was going to do, but the square pieces seemed like obvious wooden pillars to me. Problem was, I needed to cut them down, but they were too small for power tools, so I had to do it by hand. Because I had no specific measurements in mind for this build, I just cut these in half so that they were a bit easier to work with. I used a small modelling saw to cut the columns. Then carefully cut down lengthways from the top and then turn the piece 90 degrees in a vise and carefully cut down them again. This wasn't particularly straight, but that would fit the picture that was forming in my mind. I then cut two of these in half again so I'd have enough pieces to make two wooden frames. I used a bit of hot glue to stick these pieces together. I then cut two more pieces in half to give me uprights and hot glue these in place on the corners. Adding some more hot glue to the tops of these, I stuck down the other rectangle. This gave me the frame of the building. I weighed it down with a bottle of glue and left it to dry for a couple of minutes. I then decided I was going to use lollipop sticks as floorboards. I roughly measured them out and started cutting them to length. I also made sure to cut the rounded ends off. Again, all of this was very rough measurement as I wanted it to be a rundown cabin in the woods type building. I did cut a few shorter boards though as well, so I could get an overlapping floorboard look. To help support the floorboards, I cut another piece of balsa wood to fit on the long axis of the floor and hot glued that in position. This turned out to be a great help for placing the shorter floorboards. I then dry fit the floorboards in to see what they looked like before I glued them down. I used PVA glue to glue them down as it allowed me to manipulate the boards for longer before they stuck in place. Hot glue would have stuck almost immediately and caused the floorboards to be really uneven as well. PVA glue did take much longer to dry though. I think it's looking pretty good so far, if I do say so myself. Next I take some cereal box cards and measure some wall pieces by drawing around the model. In hindsight, I would have made the smaller end wall slightly larger so that they overlap the back wall ends. You'll see what I mean in a minute. I then mark out some lines on some offcuts of card so I can cut some strips to look like wooden planks. Before I cut them though, I'm going to texture them to look like wood. All I do here is take a sharp sculpting tool and score the paper with wiggly lines to make them look like wood grain. You can use anything with a hard edge for this, like a metal ruler or even a cocktail stick, just as long as you don't cut through the card. I made a bunch of these and textured them all at the same time. It was pretty time consuming. When I was cutting them out, I used a sharp knife and cut deliberately wiggly lines to look like rough sawn planks. Overlapping them gives the old school shed look that I was looking for. Using the wall pieces I cut earlier as the scaffold, I started overlapping and hot gluing the planks down. I made sure to do another random pattern like I did with the floorboard so it looked a little more authentic. When I'd covered the whole wall piece, I cut off the excess. I was really pleased with the results. I'll definitely be using this technique again. I moved on to one of the side walls and decided I wanted a window in this one. I cut out a small square in the centre of the wall with a sharp knife and then added the planks like I did on the back wall. I added planks to the third wall just like I had with the first. When I'd done all three, I dry fitted them in place, and it was only just now I realised the side walls didn't overlap the back wall. Oh well, this was a learning experience after all, I'll remember next time. I then made a bunch more textured planks for the interior walls. Before gluing down these interior planks though, I cut a small square of wire mesh to go over the window and hot glued it in place. I was then going to use the planks to cover up the excess and tidy it up a bit. Now that I glued down the planks on the interior walls, I felt like I was really getting somewhere. I realised after I finished I glued them all the same way as they were on the outside, whereas in reality they would be overlapping the opposite way. I decided not to worry about this though. Again, this was only a quick build to broaden my skills a bit. Moving on to the roof, I decided I wanted a sloping corrugated metal roof, which was going to help sell the dilapidated look I was keen on now. To make the angles in the roof, I took another piece of balsa wood, cut it to size, and then drew a diagonal to cut into two wedges. This proved pretty difficult to cut straight freehand, so I took my time with it. Good thing I was working with balsa wood really, because any harder wood would have been a nightmare to cut like this. I highly recommend a hobby saw as a general tool. It's been quite handy on a number of small tasks where big tools and power tools just aren't suitable. I'm using the Citadel hobby saw because it's sturdy and high quality, but there are any number of variants out there. Once I'd cut out the two wedges, I hot glued them in place at either end of the structure. Cut some lollipop sticks to span the roof and give me something to glue the sheet metal to eventually. They turned out to be exactly the right length with the rounded ends nipped off, just as I'd planned. Wink. I stuck these down with hot glue. I had two types of corrugated paper in stock, but I decided on the finer yellow paper for the scale of the building. I cut up a bunch of these rectangles and just nipped off the corners so that they didn't look like freshly cut metal sheets. I finish off the build by trying Mod Podge for the first time. I was sceptical at first because, like most people, I thought it was just branded PVA glue with a huge markup, but in practice it was actually pretty good at sealing the wood and it was much better than PVA glue. I could directly compare this because I'd used PVA glue on the floorboards earlier and the finish from the Mod Podge was much better. Now that I've tried it out for myself, I would recommend this if you're getting into terrain making. I think it'll make painting models much easier. And there we have it for part 1. It wasn't really a guide on how to build, just showcasing my journey with this experiment really. I definitely made some mistakes, but I've learnt for next time and I'm excited to make the next piece. If you'd like to see how I painted the model, come back for part 2 where I paint the rusty metal sheet and the old rotten wood. If you want to pick up some of the pieces I used in this video, check out some of the links below. Some of these are affiliate links and you know how these work by now. You do your shopping through those links, doesn't cost you anything extra, but I get a small commission back to help support the channel. You could also help me in these difficult economic times by donating to my online tip jar on Patreon. You know how all that works as well. If you like the content, feel free to like and subscribe and all that. Many thanks for watching and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.